Ladies and gentlemen, his Bachelor of Arts 7 hours ago today, Mr. Mujib Mashal.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. It's my honor and privilege to speak a few words about the late Ambassador Holbrooke. This past summer, during one of Ambassador Holbrooke's final visits to Afghanistan, I was working for the New York Times in Kabul. As you guys know, there's no slow day of news out of Afghanistan. But as the ambassador arrived in Kabul, we were put on high alert, sort of on our toes, because surely big stories were to break. The least we could expect was a showdown with the president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai. We all know about the ambassador's magnificent diplomatic career, from posting to Vietnam right after graduating from college, to negotiating the Dayton Peace Accords that ended the Bosnian Civil War, to representing the United States in the United Nations. And in the past 2 years, Ambassador Holbrooke served as President Obama's special envoy to Pakistan and Afghanistan, shouldering the difficult task of coordinating the efforts in Afghanistan. From the first day that he took on his new responsibility, Ambassador Holbrooke stressed one clear message: the war in Afghanistan could not be won militarily. A conflict like the one in Afghanistan is too complex. If you stubbornly push for a military victory, you only exacerbate the situation. And this past summer, when he arrived in Kabul, there was no showdown with the President Karzai. But implicitly, he declared his support for reconciliation and for reaching out to the Taliban. But for me, a more personal experience illustrates Ambassador Holbrooke's work, the impact of his work. And when I say his work, I don't mean his official diplomatic work. I mean his years of unwavering support for Seeds of Peace. Can we get the picture up, please? One Friday, this past July, a vehicle of the American military contractors ran over a civilian car in Kabul. 3 young men in the civilian car were killed on the spot. After a brief scrimmage with a crowd that gathered, the contractors fled the scene, leaving behind one of their broken-down SUVs. When I arrived with a notepad in hand to report on the details, a massive crowd had gathered already. A few angry men brought fuel from one of the nearby stores and torched the SUV that was left behind. The crowd just grew bigger and more violent. They started chanting, "Death to America, death to the foreigners." And the police, the Afghan police, was put in a very difficult and awkward position. They tried to disperse the crowd, but the crowd attacked them, took away their guns, and in a few minutes, we heard gunshots. There I was, 22-year-old, a graduate of Seeds of Peace, standing in the middle of it, trying to take notes, and trying to call our photographer to get to the scene. Growing up as a child in Kabul city, a city marred by violence, I was always advised to flee such scenes. But as a young journalist, I stood in the middle of it, taking notes. And as I watched the angry men break into their violence, my initial reaction, my initial impression was this. As I saw the crushed civilian car, the blood of the 3 young men on the road, these young men were no older than I am, I was infuriated. I could clearly connect with these protesters. I felt for them. These protesters hurled everything they got their hands onto at the police. But as I took notes, as I talked to the members of the crowd, I realized that I could see a larger picture than most of these angry men could. Unquestionably, the loss of life, particularly young life, is a tragedy. But responding with emotions and violence can only lead to further loss. Since 1993, Seeds of Peace has developed a network of close to 4,500 young leaders around the world. 3,000 of these leaders are in their 20s or older. My story, as I stood in Kabul on that day, is only one of 3,000. In Kabul, in Islamabad, in Tel Aviv, in Tahrir Square in Cairo, young Seeds of Peace leaders make decisions, small or big, every day, that are influenced and inspired by our common experience at camp, and by the robust follow-up programs that are provided to us through Seeds of Peace. It was there that I realized that at camp, we realize and try to understand that all conflicts are personal. That as humans, naturally, we're emotionally vested in conflicts. But we don't rule that out at camp. We discuss that openly. But at camp, we also realize and try to understand that there's always another side to the conflict that we can't rule out, that we can't ignore, but we should try to understand and try to speak to. This was the principle that Ambassador Holbrooke believed in, of reaching out to the other side, of not ignoring, not turning a deaf ear to the other side, and trying to understand the other side. And I can say that the impact of Ambassador Holbrooke's work, particularly in South Asia, and his support for Seeds of Peace is being felt already, every day. And today, more so than ever, as a younger generation in the Middle East and South Asia rise up to have their voices heard. And to give you an example, just to show you the extent of Ambassador Holbrooke's commitment to Seeds of Peace, during the past 2 years of his job as envoy to Afghanistan and Pakistan, he championed raising over $1 million for Seeds of Peace to be spent for programming in South Asia. The ambassador not only promoted values of understanding, coexistence, and reconciliation in his magnificent diplomatic career, but also by firmly supporting Seeds of Peace in the corridors of Washington. So tonight, on behalf of the 4,500 leaders, young leaders around the world, I'm honored and privileged to present the John Wallach Peacemaker Award posthumously to the late Ambassador Holbrooke.